Hello everybody, thanks to Rahad and the organisers for giving me the opportunity to come back today and speak. My name is Ryan Murphy and today we're going to be going through my top 5 configurations when it comes to SEC Rule 17a. But before that I just want to go through just a little bit about myself. So I've got 20 years now plus experience within Microsoft technologies, predominantly working within global retail, private banking, and of course financial services. Along with that, other regulated environments like law firms and education and public sector and so on and so forth. I'm currently working for Microsoft as a compliance SME, assisting global organizations to meet internal and external regulations with Microsoft 365 compliance solutions. If anybody wants to connect in with me, you can do so either by visiting my website and have a look at some of my blogs, vlogs, and any other events that I'm going to be attending or speaking at. Alternatively, the good old-fashioned LinkedIn, you can connect in with me there. I do share a lot of stuff on there regarding compliance, especially when it comes to regulated environments, so it'd be good to catch up. Agenda for today then, we're going to go through creating custom audit log retention. We're going to go through auto-apply sensitivity labeling for financial services. That's going to be auto-labeling client side and service side. Auto-apply retention based on financial services data, so that is looking at the sensitive information type that you map into that retention. We're also going to have a look at disposition reviews and how that enables your organization to have a defensible disposal program. Then we're going to look at creating and applying records management. So we're going to take a look at what records labels do and allow you to do from a document perspective with upversioning. And then we're going to look at regulatory records, think of immutability here, and how to enable that. More so, we're going to go through preservation lock. So what preservation lock, what it does, what it is, how to enable it, and understanding the consequences of that once you've enabled it in your environment. So before we go through them, I just wanted to take you through Compliance Manager, because more often than not, when I'm speaking to regulated environments, they'll ask, Ryan, where do we start? And I will always say Compliance Manager. Always come to Compliance Manager because it has a huge amount of assessment templates. As you can see here, I've got this one for today. And you've also got GDPR for Microsoft 365, and then the data protection baseline. Selecting the assessment template will give you an overview to begin with on where you are with the improvement actions. It gives you the details on the left-hand side of what it contains, what it maps back to, and what the regulation means. And you also have the About section. So if you're new to that regulation or you're new to that industry, you can come in here and you can select the link here, which will take you to the official actual documentation. Furthermore, within here you have the progress. So the more improvement actions that you go through, of course, the more this percentage will grow. You have the controls section within here to show you where your controls are actually live and what they're actually giving you from an organization perspective when they're gone through. You have your improvement actions. So today we're going to prominently work on 5 of these here. And then you've got the Microsoft actions. Okay, so here is where we line in with that. So as you can see within the actual improvement actions themselves, there's a huge amount of data in here that you can go through. When selecting one of these, it gives you the actual improvement actions in the background, what that is there for and what you can do to actually map back into that improvement action yourself to build up that score, and of course to actually start your journey on putting your environment into that SEC-17a regulation. Once in an improvement action, you can actually assign it to a person like your compliance admin or something like that, or someone around that particular role. And then you've got the implementation. So this gives you the information of what it is, why you would be doing this from an implementation perspective. Then you've got testing. So again, you would want to go through and test these scenarios out, especially when it comes to auto-labeling. Then you've got the standards and regulations themselves. So with this particular one, adapt disclosure controls and procedures, it gives you the additional items that you can go through and you can select and the regulation of what it's under. And then you have the last one, documents. Now I see this being used quite a lot when it comes to Compliance Manager, where you would have a specific document that is relevant to this particular change or this particular regulation itself. You can add them up in here to give cross-reference to the regulation, or even within your design itself or your configuration guides, you can upload them here and say, this particular item has been done and configured and tested. Here is the proof of it. So it gives you a lot to go through, really. But let's jump through to our first part, which is custom audit log retentions. So within the audit blade, then you have the usual where you would go and search for any particular audit log itself. And then you have audit retention policies. Now, because we only have 30 minutes today, I've gone through and created the configuration beforehand so I can just go through it with you. So on this particular topic here, I've created a 10-year regulation request. So that would be your SEC-17a or whatever time-based period you want to apply to any other regulation for that matter. Now under here, you have the configuration of what the retention does. So you've got clearly the name and then the description. Then you've got the users where this record would apply to. But more importantly, you've got the duration. So this is your time-based period of how long you want to keep those audit logs for. Then you have the record types themselves. So within here you have a plethora of information that you can go through and tick. Once it's ticked, that means it would keep those audit logs for that specific amount of time. As I said, there's a number of options in here that you would need to go through to mark out to keep those particular items. And that's pretty much it. It's very easy to create a custom audit log. So let's move on to the second part of this, which is sensitivity labeling to protect financial data. So the first configuration we're going to look at today is auto-labeling client side. And that auto-labeling client side is actually done within the label itself. So let's take a look at this configuration in this label and how to map in those sensitive information types to either recommend or enforce that label on the data that it's found or the data set. So going through the label configuration then, you have just the standard configuration up front. You have files and emails selected for my particular example. We want to go through onto auto-labeling here. So within the auto-labeling policy, once you've toggled this on, and if you go to add before anything is in here, you see the sensitive information types. Now those sensitive information types are actually the financial services information types that you want to look for and want to detect within a particular document or an email itself. Now, once it detects one of these sensitive information types, it actually will give you two options. We would always recommend first and foremost to recommend that users apply the label, and then be sure that that particular auto-labeling policy is working as you would expect it to do and is only picking out financial services information. Thereafter, we would say automatically apply the label. At this point, that's when you're actually mapping back into the SEC rule itself. Of course, you have the ability to display a message here. This can be customized to whatever your organization sees fit. But this is client-side auto-labeling. So you would need a unified labeling client installed on the machine to detect that data. Once it detects it, like I say, it will give you the ability to apply one of these two options. For my purposes, when I'm testing this out, I always go for recommend. So that's it from a client-side perspective. Let's jump over into the auto-labeling from a service-side perspective. So to get to the service-side auto-labeling, you're still under information protection, and it is this option here under auto-labeling. So as I say, here's one I created later, so let's take a look at this one and what the configuration is within inside of the policy and what it offers us from an organization perspective. Okay, so let's take a look at this rule itself. So again, standard configuration. Now here are the locations that you can apply this to. OneDrive and SharePoint is actually data at rest. However, do note, Exchange, as it states here, is automatically applied to documents when they are saved and emails when they are sent. Okay, so do bear that in mind. Microsoft don't yet have the ability to apply Exchange auto-labeling for data at rest. So within the rule itself, usually what I find is that you have rules for each location, so Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive accounts. Usually the content that it contains is the same across the 3 locations. Now it can vary in some aspects, but usually I would say that this would be the same rule across the 3 locations. So again, pretty much the same as what we've just seen from a client-side perspective, where you would need to map in the sensitive information types for it to be detected. Now, because this is service-side, as it stated before, this runs from a service-side perspective in the applications themselves. So you can actually use this particular rule to do a data discovery also. So going through these rules from Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, it can give you that data discovery, that data landscape of where all your financial services information is. Then you can take an assessment of that. And if they're in the wrong location from a SharePoint perspective, or you see you have highly classified financial services data on OneDrive, you can actually take that action to put it into the relevant places, therefore giving you a more structured result. Now, once that simulation has been done, this rule also gives you the ability to apply one of your classification taxonomies, or sensitivity label taxonomies as Microsoft likes to call them, to those data sets once they're found. So let's take a look through that. So each of these rules I've just mapped out for them to be exactly the same because I want to look for that same data. I must say within these rules, as it was within the client side, you can use custom sensitive information types if you want to, if your organization has built them out. That's absolutely fine. So as we see walking through here, once we get to the choose label to auto apply. So this is the one that I want to apply. Now, given my example today, I've chosen the Financial Services Summit, which I created prior. You can choose any of the labels that are inside of your environment, of course, as displayed here. So if you want that to be highly classified confidential internal or confidential internal, you can choose those as of what you need. Let's change that because I want them to be confidential internal. Therefore, once that data has been found and the simulation has run, and you as an admin or you as an organization are happy with the items that it's returned, then you can go and turn this policy on. Therefore, any items that are matched will get this label. So choosing that label then, and then going through. Now, when you come through to this part, you will only see 2 options. You have run policy in simulation mode, and then you have leave policy off. Microsoft purposely haven't give you an on button because they want you to go through that data that it's discovered and assess that data and mark those data, those items as relevant or as non-relevant or as matched item or non-matched item, depending on what terminology you want to use. We would always recommend that you run this on numerous occasions to fine-tune that policy so it's bringing back exactly what you're looking for from a financial services perspective, so you're sure that what it finds and what it labels is accurate. So for our example today, of course, we're going to choose the run policy in simulation mode. We'll review the data that's there, and then we simply click Save Policy. That then configures it in the background. Once it's finished, I'll take you back into the portal and I'll show you around that policy when it's created. Okay, so here's the one I created earlier. So let's take a look at this one and let's see what the configuration is in the background, how this works, and how you can match those items to get that auto labeling to fit in with the SEC rule. So here's the policy I created earlier. On the right hand side here, you can see the details, the name I give it, the status of which it's in. Because it's brand new, we only get the ability to run that simulation, remember. What time the simulation started, what label I'm going to want it to apply once I can turn the policy on. So once it's done the simulation, once it's given me the items to review, all these boxes here will be populated with data sets that it's found. Of course, the info to label, so anything to do with financial services in our perspective. The locations that we have it applied, the rules for auto applying, okay, and then obviously two other items here is who created it and what date they created it. So as I alluded to before, once you get the items that are pulled back and found from the scanner itself, you would want to go through those items and make sure that they're actually items that are matched to the actual policy that you're using. Only then would you want to go and turn on the policy to enforce this label. Now, if this label has encryption on, which I would imagine it would do when it comes to the actual regulation and the data that you're, sorry, the sensitive information type that you're looking for, this is why we're saying be very, very careful of what you actually look for and match out. Be sure it's exactly as you want it before you turn this on and start labeling items automatically. So that's walked through the two sensitivity labeling, auto labeling options Microsoft offer. So let's move on to the third point in our agenda today, which is auto applying retention labels. So again, when coming over into information governance and records management when it comes to retention within SEC regulation, here I've created one from previously. Let's take a look at this one and the configuration in the background. So let's jump into this one now. So within here, creating the actual label itself, then you have a number of options. So you have your retention period here. So this would map back to the actual regulation time-based period itself, and then you have to start the retention period based on. Now, this gives you two options. It gives you when items were created, and then obviously the modified side of it as well. So when the item was modified. So there's two options that you can choose to. Building out the right retention policy would mean that you'd have the right retention period and the retention period based on. So make sure you get those two right. Additionally, within this label, we're going to apply a disposition review. So let's take a look at that disposition review. So within here then, the disposition review gives you, as I alluded to before, that defensible disposable program as an in-depth solution. So you can actually go through and add in multiple stages for review before that data is actually committed for deletion. So as your first step here, I have one of my employees, if you like, and then I have another one from a secondary review. That gives you the ability to have that assessment all the way through the 5 stages or how many stages that you need before you commit that data for deletion. So that's disposition reviews. So once that label is created, then let's go and have a look at the policy to map in the financial services information. So coming over to label policies then to get that auto labeling set up. Let's take a look at the one I created earlier. So again, standard configuration. And more importantly, on the second point here, you've got info to label. So what information do you want to label? So you have 3 options. You have apply label to content that contains sensitive info, which is what we've gone for. You've got apply label to content that contains specific words or phrases or properties. And then you have apply label to content that matches a trainable classifier. But for today, we're going to concentrate on the sensitive info because we want to look for financial services data. Again, exactly the same as we had in the auto labeling service side and client side for sensitivity labels, we have the same when it comes to retention and retention labels. Adding in the financial services information of which you want to look for. And again, this supports custom sensitive information types as well as default ones. You add in the relevant data here, okay? Then you select next. You publish it to the locations that you want it to be published to. And again, as we saw on the service side labeling, we have the actual label itself that we want to apply. But in this case, it's a retention label. So we can see, as we configured before, we have the 7 years to keep, then the disposition review, and then the deletion. That's it from creating that retention label from auto labeling perspective when it comes to financial services data, which also mapped you into the regulation itself. Now let's take a look at our 4th point on the agenda today, which is enabling and applying records management with retention within 365. So within records management then, under file plan, you have the ability to create and publish labels here. Now for my example, I have two particular labels that I want to go through today, which is regulatory records, so think of immutability when it comes to an item, and then internal records versioning. Now this can be named whatever you want it to name it, but I've named it this so we can reference this and it's easier for you to remember. The two of them do very different things. So a record applied as a record label still gives you the ability to interact with that document. So you can lock it and unlock it and then up version it. When it comes to a record label, of course, the naming convention applies. It actually marks the item as immutable. So you can't do anything to it. So it actually locks that record, which is what the SEC is looking for. So let's take a look at the records version first. So looking at this particular configuration then, within records management, when you're creating a label, you have the ability to apply a file plan descriptor. Now this is very good if you need to map this back to a particular regulation, so anybody coming in from an admin perspective can see that this is what they have and this is the type of label that they're dealing with given the information that you have inside of this. But let's go through the other settings of which are more important to us today. So within here then you can see that you have a number of items here. You have mark items as a record and then you have a description of what that does, okay? But the most important thing here is you have the record status to be locked or unlocked. And then you have a regulatory record here. So in our case here, I've selected mark item as a record because we need to interact with that data set. So let's go back and have a look at the actual regulatory record from the other policy. So back in the main portal then for file plan, let's select the regulatory record here, and let's take a look at this one. Again, standard in configuration. Again, you can add a file plan descriptor. I would always advise that you take advantage of this. But on this particular time, we have mark items as a regulatory record. Now you'll see that this context here is actually different to what comes up when you mark items as a record. Now, when it comes to creating regulatory records, these are not available out of the box. You actually need to go into PowerShell to enable this option here, which I'll show you now. So connect to the IPPS module, and then within here then you just need to run this particular command here. Once this is run, that's when you'll see the option in here to apply as a regulatory record. You cannot do that without running that command. Once that's done, of course, and once you can choose that option, that's when you get that configuration in the background. Again, on this particular one, I've marked it as a trigger for a disposition review, so I can have that multi-stage disposition review to make sure that that item itself, because it's been an important item to the environment or your organization, that we can actually go through and commit that data for deletion. And what I'll do now is I'll just show you what that looks like on the data set itself once we've once we've marked the item as a record or a regulatory record. So let's jump into my SharePoint. So in my example SharePoint here, I have two libraries. I have versioning documents, which is the record versioning that I was just talking about, and then I have the regulatory record. But let's take a look at the versioning documents first and foremost. So I can see in here I have a document. Now, to be sure what that document has applied to it, I can highlight that document. And then I can see on the right-hand side what's applied to this document from a label perspective. So we can see that I have the label that we were talking about just before when it comes to the record itself. Now, under record status here, you can actually see that this item is locked. Now, if I select this, it gives me the opportunity to toggle this as unlocked. Therefore, I can actually interact with this data and I can change it. I can upversion it, I can add context to it, I can remove context from it, okay? So that is what your record gives you from a record versioning perspective. It allows you to unlock it and then lock it again once you've finished. Now let's take a look at the regulatory label and how that applies to the data. So back to my SharePoint here, I'm just going to check on the regulatory records and look at the item within here. So again, we can highlight this, and on the right hand side we get it, so it marks out as a regulatory record which is applied to this label. Now I have information inside of both of these documents that map back to the financial information from a sensitive information type that we were talking about before. It's detected it, and then it's auto applied this label to it. But on this particular one, because it's a regulatory record, when I go to locked here, you'll see that it just highlights. It doesn't give me the opportunity to toggle it on or off. Therefore, it's saying to you that this item cannot be changed. So AKA, you have that immutability when it comes to that item perspective. And again, that's what the regulator is actually looking for, and that's how 365 can give you that configuration. So moving on to our last point in the agenda today, which is preservation lock. I'm going to show you what that is, what it can do, and what the effects of that are once you have it turned on. So let's go and move over into that. So moving over into records management under label policies then. We can see here that I have my test one from today. I'm not going to concentrate on that. I'm just going to concentrate on the regulatory record here. So when I highlight this and I go to edit, I can see within here, this is the label we were talking about previously. So let's have a look how you apply preservation lock to this. So coming back onto the main screen, we can see that we have the regulatory record here, which I know I've configured as a regulatory item. So it's that non-immutable item. So I need to now apply preservation lock to the policy itself, so no one can change that. So when you enable preservation lock, no one can disable it. Locations can be added but not removed. Labels can be added but not removed. Not even a global admin can turn this off, so be very wary when you apply this. So this would only be applied to anything coming from this regulator or any other regulator that applies, wants you to apply immutability, not only to the item, but the policy of which the label is set within the item. So if I highlight this now, we can now see that preservation lock is turned on for this one. In comparison to our other internal record, we can see that preservation lock is not switched on. Now, because of the severity of preservation lock and what it does, again, this cannot be toggled on or off inside of the actual policy itself. You have to do this via PowerShell, of which I will show you now. So you would want to go and find the naming convention for the record that the label that you've just created for that record purpose, as I have here. And then you would run get compliance policy against it. Now, once this gives you the data that you're looking for, what we're looking for within here is restrictive retention. Okay, and as we can see here, it's actually set to true. But how do you get that to true? Well, I'll show you now. And what we would run is this command here. So we'd need to run set retention compliance policy against the one that you created for regulatory purposes, add in the name, and then set the restrictive retention to true. That then gives you not only the immutability from the label which is applied to the data set, but also from a policy perspective as well. So that's what preservation lock gives you. It gives you the ability to lock down the actual policy so nobody can remove, nobody can tamper with the policy itself, because of the importance of applying that regulatory item or label to that data set to offer that immutability. So you have those phases working in tandem with each other to cover you from the SEC perspective. And that's it for my session. So thank you very much again to Raz and the organisers. If anybody has any questions on this, I will be back later around 6 p.m. for the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to note them down and then you can ask them at that time. Again, if you don't and you want to stay in touch, here is my website and here is my LinkedIn. So thank you for your time. Bye for now.